So if you remember, I was the one who actually enjoyed Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, when it came out last December. I know it got mostly bad reviews, but I thought it was cool enough. I don't know, neat world building, cool action. Not the best movie ever or anything, didn't make my top 10 of the year, but that was just part 1 of the story. Now here's part 2. Let's see how this wraps up. Rebel Moon, Part 2, The Scargiver. Yeah, obviously this is Part 2 of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, which is his take on Star Wars, essentially. And yeah, it's true, I haven't watched Part 1 since I reviewed it. I did watch like a 5-minute recap video before I watched Part 2 though. Thanks, YouTube. So in Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, after the events of Part 1, A Child of Fire, in which it looked like Korra, the main character, the Messiah or whatever, killed the main villain, Atticus Noble, the Admiral. But no, turns out they put him in a back-to-tank and he's alive. So now the crew we gathered in Part 1, they all come to this world called Velt, where they did the villagers a solid in Part 1. So now they're like, alright, we're gonna train up, we're gonna prepare for war, because the Empire is on their way, they're gonna be here in a few days. And then the war begins, and now we have our snooze fest of a movie. I mean it, dude, what happened?
What happened?
I gotta be honest with you, I had this movie on my TV just a few hours ago, because it's a Netflix release, and I got pretty bored so fast that I pretty much spent the entire movie on my phone. I was really just half watching it, because it just failed to hold my interest. The characters are actually quite boring, because they're all cliche. You got the main character Korra, still played by Sofia Boutella, and yeah, she is like the Messiah, the one who has like a bunch of nicknames, including the Scargiver, or Arthaleus, said to be the one who will defeat the evil. It's almost like one of those prophecy type things, although I don't think it actually is in this case. Feels that way though. I do like though how, and they showed this in Part 1, she used to fight for the Empire, but now she's fighting against them. I like a good redemption arc. That's one of the many reasons I love Vaggie from Has Been Hotel so much. But yeah, if there is anything interesting about this character, that is it. Other than that, she and all the rest of the characters in this movie really have no personalities. The love interest, Gunner, that's all he is, the love interest. The villain, Atticus Noble, raised from the dead from the back-to-tank, cliche-ass villain. Seriously, he's so cliche, he's not even memorable, which sucks because that's such a waste of Ed's screen. We know he's a good actor, he's played great villains before. My dad and I were just watching the first Deadpool movie yesterday, and while watching that movie, my dad and I were both like, yeah, that guy's a dick. He made for a memorable villain in Deadpool because he was taunting Wade Wilson. In this movie, he's just cliche monologue villain. And of course, it's not the actor's fault, it's the script's fault. Djimon Hounsou, I will say, has a lot of screen time in Part 2 here, or at least a lot of dialogue, but he plays Djimon Hounsou. You know, he plays the character that you would expect him to be in a movie like this. The badass general who yells his dialogue because he's a hardcore soldier. You will never make it to Ronin. I love Djimon Hounsou, guy's a badass, but his character in this movie was cliche too. The funny thing is, the robot Jimmy, I guess his name is, voiced by Anthony Hopkins, he was teased so much in Part 1. Like the end of Part 1, spoiler alert, it shows him at the end, he's like turncoat against the Empire. You're like, alright, he's gonna be a badass in Part 2, man, he's gonna fight. It feels like he has less screen time in Part 2 than he did in Part 1, oh my god. He doesn't really do much in this movie at all. He does fight a little bit, but it really does not feel like that teasing in Part 1 pays off here in Part 2 at all. Like, I feel like Anthony Hopkins had more screen time as Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs than he has screen time as his voiced character Jimmy in this movie. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's just how it feels. No payoff with this character whatsoever. And yeah, the reason I found this movie so boring is because the whole thing is just so cliche. I've seen this so many times before. The underdog rebels against the massive empire. Let's see, The Hunger Games, Star Wars, hell, even Has Been Hotel Season 1. Except in those stories, it really works because the characters are relatable. You enjoy watching them, they're fun. Well, in Star Wars and Has Been Hotel anyway. I wouldn't exactly call those characters in Hunger Games fun. Doesn't mean they're bad though, but point is, there was something to keep me engaged in those stories. Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, doesn't have anything there to keep me engaged. It's all just played out really bland. And also the story, the plot of this movie, it's played out really clunky. I know it's like we get to this planet where the last battle is going to take place, and you know, it's the celebratory night before the courageous last stand. Our crew is sitting around a table, and you know how in Part 1 a big complaint was that the supporting characters didn't have a lot of depth? In this scene where the main crew is sitting at this table, yeah, you've heard this in reviews before, but it is absolutely true. This does happen. Djimon Hounsou's like, alright, let's talk about ourselves. Let's share our backstories. And I swear to God, the movie spends what feels like 20 to even 30 minutes just touching on each of these side characters' backstories, all in the form of narrated flashbacks. I was like, oh my god, this is the night before the battle, and we're gonna spend 20 minutes touching on these characters' backstories? Too little too late, Zach. No, Part 1 was when you were supposed to do that. It's like this movie's suffering from Man of Steel syndrome, where the story's being told out of order. I didn't like that in Man of Steel, and I don't like it now here in Rebel Moon. Granted, I know it's not exactly the same, but you get it. And then the big final war starts, and I swear to God, I actually checked to see how far into the movie it was so I could actually look you bold-faced and confirm for you that when the big war starts, we're not even halfway through this 2-hour movie, which means the entire second half of this thing is all fighting and battles for an hour. Holy shit. Yeah, for me, the first thing it reminded me of was The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Because the final battle in that movie also dragged on for too long, especially in the extended edition. You watch that and you're like, alright, now I see why it was dragged out into more movies than it probably should have been. Exact same case here. I feel like Rebel Moon would have been better served as one big movie, because this final battle, war, whatever it was, did not have to be as long as an hour. Because it just dragged on for so long, it was like a Transformers movie, where after a while I was like, oh my god, we're still fighting? I get it, there's conflict here, it can end now. Granted, the visuals, they can be pretty cool at times, they were pretty cool in part 1 as well. The choreography, when it's all going down, yeah, it's fun to watch, but again, it's just all background noise. I didn't care about the story or the characters fighting. The only reason I would watch these action scenes again is if I were really bored out of my mind and I just wanted to watch random action scenes, just to watch people fighting with sci-fi laser guns. The Zack Snyder slow-mo is abundant, the dialogue is cheesy. Actually, the slow-mo, I never really had a problem with Zack Snyder's slow-mo, because for me, he's like the one director I can give a pass for that to, because I get it, that's a shtick of his. He loves his slow-mo, and I do like the stylistic flavor it gives to his movies. Granted, in this movie, it does get a little tired, but I still don't have too much of a problem with it, just in general. That's just me, though. And Tom Holkenborg's musical score, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing as in part 1, A Child of Fire. Those epic choir vocals in the opening logos, I'm like, yeah, that's still some pretty cool shit. The score is actually really good, probably my favorite aspect of this movie, if I'm being honest. But yeah, in the end, as the person who admits that he enjoys the original cut of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, the original cut of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, really fell off. I honestly don't see how an extended edition or rated R edition or whatever is gonna fix this. Cause I don't know how adding to the story is gonna make this better. The whole thing is still cliche as hell, with boring characters and action that you've seen in a million other movies and things before. Not just movies, TV shows, video games, comic books, whatever. Nothing really interested me in this movie, and it's a bummer. Cause I mean, it's Zack Snyder's sci-fi. That should be a winning combination, you know? I'm a Zack Snyder fan. I'm a sci-fi fan. Although I will admit, the Snyderverse for DC, that's done. Let's move on. I don't see it being sold to Netflix anytime soon, sorry. But I'm still a fan of Zack Snyder's style. The guy's got some really cool ideas. This one just missed. Simple as that. Hey, it's okay, Zack. Everyone misses once in a while. I know Rebel Moon, like, I've heard it's trying to go for a franchise with more installments and spin-offs or whatever, but due to the overwhelming negative reviews this movie and the first one have been getting, I don't really see it moving forward, so sorry. Cause this movie, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, is just, it's not good. I wouldn't recommend watching it. But just in case you have, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, have you watched it yet? What did you think about it? And if you're a Zack Snyder fan, what kind of project would you like to see him work on next? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And of course, thank you for subscribing. Now if you'll excuse me, holy shit, that new Deadpool and Wolverine trailer just dropped. I'm gonna go watch that a million more times, cause that trailer's got me hyped. That'll be my next video for sure. So be on the lookout for that. Peace!